we're at the very start of this very tailored approach to health and well-being that AI is going to bring us. Now that we're not seeing sunrise and sunset, we're deficient.
I wanted to ask you on your take on gut-brain connection.
Your microbiome is hugely important for not only general health, but certainly for these brain conditions.
So how does technology help us in these areas today?
The thing that I think is going to shake things up the most for sure.
Welcome to the Lubo Smith podcast. Today I am pleased to welcome Sarah Turner, co-founder and CEO of CeraThrive, a company behind a unique red light therapy device to help us heal our guts and optimize the brain function. All of that through red light therapy. And it was a very insightful discussion where we talked a lot about biohacking and longevity, a topic that is very close to my heart. So let's get to it. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me for the show. I have personally tried a lot of different kinds of devices with red light, lasers, etc. And it seems like you have found a passion in that area, and I'm very much looking forward to dive into the discussion, and I would like to kindly welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
And just to kick things off, where did you actually find the passion for pursuing your journey in the photobiomodulation space?
Yeah, I actually started off my career in pharmaceuticals. So I started off as a pharmaceutical research scientist, looking mainly at how we deliver drugs to the body rather than working on the actual drugs. So I was looking at like asthma delivery devices and things like that. And I was doing some studies looking at why certain devices were not having the effect. And it turns out that if you use a certain plastic, then you develop static in the body, and then the drug doesn't deposit in the right places. And actually the one solution to that was to make sure that the person is grounded. So I did a lot of experiments where I was grounded. I wore like special lab coats with like metal fibers, all kinds of things. And that got me thinking, really, it's about the kind of the environment in the person and what's going on around, more so than actually the drug that's having this effect. And probably, a good way to help drug delivery would be to ground everybody, or at least teach people how to not have so much charge in their body, which was obviously not kind of what the drug companies were after. We just changed the plastic. That was the simple solution to that from the drug company point of view. But it set me off on a whole train of thinking, okay, how could we actually improve the state of the body rather than using pharmaceutical intervention? So that led me on a whole thing. I did a nutrition degree. I then went on to do clinical neuroscience. I moved to California for a while, did all the biohacking. And I made some movies about how light affects water. And that's what got me into the whole light thing, because actually light can change the structure of water if it's next to a hydrophilic surface, which just means like a water-loving surface, like you would find in the body. So because I had a background in neuroscience, I was thinking, okay, rather than thinking about structuring the water, maybe we can just structure the body with light. And that was the start of my journey. So it's a little bit unconventional and not the usual entry to red light therapy that most people have, because most people focus on a different mechanism in the body. But that was my entry point, really.
There are so many rabbit holes that we could dive into. You have talked about grounding, and my first question in regards to that is like, do you feel it will be beneficial that if we all walk more barefoot, that we ground ourselves naturally, or there is these special kinds of mats that you sleep on that help you with grounding as well? What is your take on that? Because you are looking at it through a scientific lens, so I would love to hear it from a professional.
Yeah, I do think it's very important, and I do have those sheets on my bed. I always sleep with the grounding sheets on my bed. I've had them for a long time. When I was in California, I could just, hang the pole out the window and actually ground into the ground. Now I'm sort of in London or England mostly, and I can use the earthing point on a mains plug. So I always sleep on an earthing mat, and I do try and ground every day. So whether that's going outside and taking my shoes off and standing on the grass, or now it's winter, I tend to kind of just go into the woods and just hang on to a tree, or somehow just make sure that I'm touching something that's in the ground, because the science is pretty strong, actually. We can actually absorb electrons up through our bodies. And the more that we can dissipate charge in the body, the more efficient a lot of the processes in our body becomes.
You have mentioned hugging trees in the forest. It sounds a little bit woo-woo, like a spiritual kind of thing. But I'm pretty sure that there is some scientific reason behind it, and maybe we could try to bridge the gap a little bit, because I know that people do it, and people do it for a reason, but usually it's just a thought rather than looking at what is actually happening. What's the science behind it? Yes.
But if you think about what's happening, I mean, everything in the body works on charge, really. It's how proteins fold, it's how molecules work. Really, everything is working on charge. We're just talking about electrons, really, and whether you've got free electrons, reactive oxygen species. All these things are scientific terms that people accept. So really, if you think about how the body's working in that way, if you're able to actually change the amount of electrons, and you can get them up through the ground, then you can have a very real physiological effect on the body. It's not, I know tree hugging does sound very woo-woo, but you are actually having a direct effect. And we are really mammals that have evolved for a very long time in connection with the ground. It's only relatively recently that we're living totally indoor lifestyles, totally, having shoes on all the time, all of those things. So human biology is much more adapted to an outdoor lifestyle than perhaps we think about nowadays in our very kind of indoor lives that we live right now. And maybe that's the cause of a lot of chronic illness. Certainly, I think grounding, getting enough light exposure, maybe exposure to extremes of cold and heat. These are all things that our biology is adapted to, and that will help us improve our health if we can kind of follow some of these more, I don't know, sometimes it's called primal health, isn't it? Some of these more paleo, primal, whatever you want to label it, but certainly getting back to being more in line with nature.
I'm a big fan of contrast therapy. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I wish I would be able to do it on a daily basis. Sometimes it's not that easy to combine it with a lot of travel. But where do you see the red light therapy fall into the mix of what people should be doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Is that an everyday thing, or are there any special protocols that you have seen working the best over time?
Yeah, well, kind of leading on from what I'm saying about how we need to be exposed to more kind of a natural environment. I think what red light therapy is doing, more or less, it's mimicking some of those long wave red and near infrared wavelengths that we would normally see at sunrise and sunset. So if you think about, a normal kind of diurnal mammal that's living outside, you would be exposed to these red lights. You would be exposed to red light wavelength twice a day, sunrise and sunset. That's kind of how our whole biology is set up. And actually, in sunrise, if you actually see those long waves, it sets off a whole cascade of reactions that helps you to prepare for the rest of the day, even changes your skin chemistry, seeing red light in the morning, which then enables you to be outside and tolerate UV light. And then in the evening, you're seeing red light that's switching on a load of hormones that's allowing you to sleep better, to recharge and regenerate. So from that point of view, if we're kind of following that example, you really want to be doing red light therapy almost every day, because we're almost, now that we're not seeing sunrise and sunset, we're deficient in these long wave lights. I think of it, people can understand vitamin deficiency. If you don't get enough vitamin C, then, you start to develop scurvy and all kinds of things. If you don't see these different wavelengths of light, you also start to develop long-term conditions, because we are meant to be exposed to red and near infrared light on a daily basis. So when we're using these therapeutic devices, we're really just supplementing those deficiencies.
I feel like with vitamins, it's very easy because it's tangible. You can go, you can take a test. We know what is the reference value that, of, let's say, vitamin C or magnesium that one should have in their bodies. And like we can measure it and we can say, okay, I'm deficient, so I should be supplementing that vitamin. But with sun exposure, is there a proxy that we can look at to be able to evaluate, am I getting enough sunlight or am I not?
Yeah.
How can one find out about that?
I think you're right. It's not like we can do a test and say, okay, you're deficient in, 1070 nanometer wavelength today. But we can look at mitochondrial health, because the main target for sunlight, or the main way that light therapy works in the body, is via the mitochondria. We know that red and near infrared light stimulates certain enzymes within the mitochondria. So if you have very poor mitochondrial efficacy, then that's a good indicator that you are deficient in light as a wavelength. But this, again, it's all very controversial. We don't really have a measurement. There are some people that are bringing out tests of mitochondrial function. But I think really the main way that you can tell that you are not receiving all of the light that you need is just how well you feel. Normally, if you've got a low mitochondrial functionality, you don't feel very well, you don't sleep very well, you don't look very well, you aren't able to do a huge amount of exercise. So I mean, I know that's very broad. That could apply to vitamin deficiency, that could apply to anything. But I think the proof is when you actually start to give people back these long wave red lights, do people start to improve and get better? And that is the case. So we need to fall back then on research. What happens if you supplement people with red light therapy, keeping everything else constant, is people do tend to upgrade their health. They tend to be able to handle a lot more in life, a lot more stress, and all these other markers that we could look at, heart rate variability, EEG. There's a lot of things we can look at to gauge overall health. So that, I think, is the way that we gauge it. We have to fall back then on the research.
Fortunately enough, I have an opportunity to spend a lot of time in California.
Nice.
And I think indirectly, I feel that when I'm there, I'm getting exposed to a lot more sun than when I'm in Prague, for example. So I think, and these are my two primary locations. So I think that subconsciously, I think it's working that way, but I have not really done a consistent red light protocol to be able to judge whether I feel a lot better or not. I have tried it very randomly every now and then, but it seems like you follow a very, I would say, strict in a way protocol to optimize yourself on a daily basis, which I think could be a whole different world, especially if you are in a place where getting the sunlight exposure is not as easy, and it can happen on a daily basis.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, subjectively, you do feel better in the sun, right? Like when you go to California and that sun hits you, you feel good.
No, I feel amazing.
You feel amazing because the body wants you to be out in the sun. It actually activates natural endorphins in the body because, your biology wants you to be out in the sun. And I think, that's why, I mean, I live mainly here in London a lot of the time. Everybody's kind of off to Spain as soon as they get their summer holidays because you want to have that buzz of the sunlight. It's a buzz. It really is, because your whole biology is geared up to try and get you out in the sun because it is so beneficial.
Before we dive into actually the products that you have developed and how they are helping and how you have gone about building, assembling them and launching the product to the market, I wanted to ask you on your take on gut-brain connection, because I feel like this is a very popular topic, but I think it also like lacks the level of science that we would like to have in that region to know exactly how things are going. But it would be very interesting to hear it from somebody who is spending majority of the time, like yourself, in doing a research on that.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's becoming a hot topic right now because so many people have gut issues at the moment for various reasons. And it does seem to be on the increase. And it's also now linked to a lot of chronic illness, which, many years ago when I was first looking at it, they had already linked gut issues with some conditions like Natasha McBride wrote a fabulous book about Asperger's or autistic spectrum disorder, it's called now, linking what was going on in the gut with what's going on in the brain. Also Parkinson's, there's a strong gut connection there. And I think now, because people have got more sophisticated tools for looking at bacterial species, we can look to see, okay, there's a certain microbiome profile that tends to match a certain disease condition. Therefore, your microbiome is hugely important for not only general health, but certainly for these brain conditions. And that's because we just have this two-directional communication between the gut and the brain via the vagus nerve, but also through metabolites that are going through the blood. And probably, different types of frequency that's happening between the gut and the brain. There's probably a lot going on that we're still not actually measuring. But certainly the vagus nerve is something that people are really starting to study and look at now, the tone of the vagus nerve and what's actually being transported. So I think the people call it the second brain, don't they, the gut? But probably it's probably the first brain, from an embryonic point of view, it's the first organ compared to the brain. And there's a lot more communication that goes from the brain to the gut than the other way around. So the gut is actually acting as a sensor to kind of tell the brain how to respond, what's going on. I mean, we know it subjectively, if you're going to do a big presentation, you get nervous, you feel it in your gut. We know that there is this connection. People intuitively know it, but now we're starting to see this connection with many, many illness states and with performance. People are now actually manipulating their microbiome in order to maybe gain extra performance or to kind of optimize rather than just looking at how we can prevent disease.
Right. And that's why we talk about gut feeling, and it's been part of our lives for a very, very long time. But now we are little by little making progress towards actually understanding what's happening within the body. And I feel like, that's definitely nowhere close to the finish line to have the full understanding, but it seems like we are getting a little closer at least.
I think so. There's data published all the time on what's going on with the gut. The gut has a lot of neural tissue, actually. The gut makes a lot of neurotransmitters. A lot of what the microbiome is doing for us is creating some of these molecules which are essential for our health. So from that point of view, I think people are just beginning to understand the importance of the microbiome. Recently there was that fantastic program, Fantastic Fungi. Did you watch that? Where we kind of got an understanding of what's going on with the soil and trees and things.
Yes.
But I think now it's kind of a revelation where people are starting to look at, okay, how is that going on in our human bodies too? What is the roles of all these fungi and yeast and bacteria and everything that we kind of got in our guts? They're actually playing a very important role. And so we really do need to look after and support and have a good, stable microbiome. And of course, this is that part of this whole gut-brain connection that we really need to, there's probably, let's say, biology is a lot more interesting maybe than just the kind of lock and key hypothesis that we've been taught up to now. There's a lot more going on. There's this biodirectional communication, which is fascinating.
Got it. Well, what I love doing is connecting the world of technology with the world of health and longevity. And I would love to ask you about all kinds of different things that we can do for our longevity. But before we get to that, I would like to understand the technological piece of what you are building. Basically, if I understand correctly, you have two devices, one for the head and the other one for the gut directly.
Yeah.
So how technology helps us these days to combat illness, work on prevention, and for some also optimize our performance, because I think these are kind of the three areas, right? There is people that try to treat something that is relatively severe and ongoing. There are people that just want to live a healthy life and they want to take the necessary steps to be as healthy as possible. And then there are the kind of people, and I would probably put myself among them, that try to squeeze every single bit of energy and performance to get the most out of life. So how does technology help us in these areas today?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting things happening, especially with neurotechnology, looking at how we can influence the brain. Because we now know that things like red light therapy, for example, is a fairly simple therapy. You're just providing in some kind of device these wavelengths that we potentially are deficient in, or potentially we're providing them in a way that the body can utilize more efficiently. So we can be, once we found out, okay, what can we do to replace these deficient wavelengths in the brain, then we can work out what is the optimum way to deliver these wavelengths. So the device that I've started to develop, I've used 4 different wavelengths of light, because we know that the body has got different light receivers depending on the wavelength. And as I mentioned to you before, I came into this via looking at how light structures water. So we have a light receiver in the mitochondria, which is very, very interesting. And we know that stimulates energy in the form of ATP, which is the energy molecule. But also potentially we could be changing the structure of water using light. And that's also another energy source, believe it or not, because you can have this charge separation of water where water actually changes its structure. And again, these are things which are now starting to be proven in the laboratory. This is not just woo-woo science. This is actual validated research. So I think then we just need to work out how to deliver it. So that was my main goal, is how to deliver these things more efficiently. One thing we need to kind of make sure you're putting it on the area, make sure that it's sufficient power that you get through to the brain. And then we can do all kinds of interesting things, because we know the brain is oscillating or pulsing or have different brainwave frequencies. We can use the light source to actually entrain brainwave frequencies at the same time we're delivering the light. So my device does have 4 wavelengths and also a pulsing schedule. So that means we can entrain brainwaves with the light while we're actually providing the brain with energy. So we're trying to do lots of things at once in order to maximize, maybe a 10-minute therapy session, giving the brain more energy, structuring the water, and then also potentially entraining the brainwave frequencies as well.
I have heard the term structured water in the past, but I don't know what it really means and whether it's a thing. It seems like it is a thing and you are taking it very seriously. But I have seen people experimenting with it in different ways. But what is actually structured water? What does it mean?
So if you think about water can have different forms. So water can be liquid. It can be like a vapor or steam, and it can be ice, which is a solid. So these different kinds of water, already
I still follow, by the way.
So already we have different kind of forms of water, but it's, you're still talking about water as H2O. It's just because we have different kinds of bonding. That's what we're talking about mainly. How the water molecules are bonded depends on whether they're a solid, a liquid, or a gas. And what some studies have found, and I'm basing what I'm saying now mainly on the work of Professor Jerry Pollack, who's a researcher at Washington University, who wrote a fabulous book called Fourth Phase Water. So what he's talking about, as well as solid, liquid, and gas, you have another phase of water. And this is the water that we potentially would see in a biological system. it's kind of like ice because it's very structured, but it's charge separated because the protons, which are the hydrogens that bond ice and make it very hard, have been pushed away from the surface of the membrane into the bulk water. So then you have this kind of gel phase that's next to the membrane, and then you have a kind of positively charged because you've got the protons phase adjacent to that. So really, it's kind of like, it's like having ice, but you're just maybe taking out a little bit of the bonding. And imagine then that this is because it's a gel, it's a slightly more viscous phase of water. So this has implications for biology, if it's aligning all of our membranes, potentially, anything that's slipping down there, like all the blood cells could slip down more efficiently, the more of this layer you have. And the body works a lot on things like axial mechanical rotors. So like ATP, which is how you make energy in the body. If you actually look at the molecule, it is almost like a little mechanical rotor. And so all of these things can spin and work more efficiently if they're lubricated. Everything works better if it's lubricated, right? We know that from cars. It's the same with the body. And what this structured water is doing is kind of acting as that lubricant, and everything then is working more efficiently. And it's probably a way that the body is actually storing energy, because wherever you have a separation of charge, a positive and minus, there you have kind of, that's the basis of a battery in the body.
So it's the intention of both of the devices, the one for the head and the one for the belly as well, to do that as well?
It's mainly for the head one, where I'm targeting this long wavelength, because water will absorb light, but it tends to be longer wavelength of light. So that's why for most devices, you'll see they go up to 850 nanometers. So 850 nanometers is just the length of the wave. So if people may have heard, if they're looking at red light therapy devices, maybe people buy them and they have like 600 nanometers, which is visible red, or 630 or 850. The reason why people have these very specific wavelengths is because the devices are targeting the mitochondria, because the mitochondria will absorb light at those very specific wavelengths. Most people don't want to go higher than that because water starts to absorb, and people don't want that because they want to keep it in the mitochondria to just get the energy effect. Whereas I think it is probably structured water is having an influence too. So I kind of hedge my bets, and I have all four wavelengths. I have the ones that target the mitochondria and the ones that target the water. But in the body panel at the moment, I just have the 630 and 850 because it's much easier to get into the gut. And there I am mainly targeting mitochondria rather than the structured water in the brain.
Got it. And is it the same, basically, protocol, same cycle that you go through every time, or you can enable different kinds of protocols on those devices?
Yeah, so I do different protocols depending on the pulsing, because as you know, we have different brainwave frequencies depending what we're trying to do. If we want to be very calm and meditate, our brain is actually oscillating at a different frequency than if we're kind of looking to increase our performance, for example. So you may have heard of gamma. Have you heard of gamma brainwaves?
Yes.
So gamma brainwaves is a 40 hertz oscillation. So that just means that it's oscillating 40 times a second. So if we want to get our brain into that state where we're in this gamma kind of perform mindset, we can actually help the brain to do that by flashing the light source on, off and on for 40 times a second. Actually, mine does a variation around the mean because I think the body responds to a variable signal more than a static signal. We know that from heart rate variability. But certainly you can then deliver light in a way that you're giving yourself the edge and enabling yourself to get into different brain states. So I will use different programs depending what I'm trying to do. If I meditate, I'm using a different pulse frequency to if I'm, going to do some kind of running or any kind of physical activity where I want to kind of perform better.
Is there a software component of the product as well, so that you can maybe enhance those protocols over time and make it make the device that people get today even better in the future?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep a record of everything. I have an app. Everything is done via an app, so allow people to record what they're doing. I also have various questionnaires where people can kind of record their performance. And also I think it's to do with like we call it stacking your hacks, like the biohacking people call it stacking your hacks, doing a few things at once. So in my app, I also have sound files that are also mimicking like some of the pulsing schedules, because you can, the same as you can do with light, you can do with sound. So while someone's pulsing their light at a gamma frequency, which is 40 hertz, we can also then have a sound file, which is having 40 hertz in the background, or we can have a meditation breath work where you're actually trying to sync your breath to those different frequencies. So all of these things kind of combine to make a program. So it's not just like putting something on your head, you're putting something on your head, you're deciding what goal you're going to use it for, and then you're backing that up maybe with breath work or with sound too.
Do you also try to collect, you mentioned the surveys or questionnaires.
Mm-hmm.
Do you try to collect also like, for example, heart rate data, HRV from various variables that people have to see the immediate impact of the session, as well as the long-term impact, right? If they basically go through the protocol for 2 weeks, a month to see whether something has changed?
Yeah, at the moment, it's something that has to be voluntary. So I can't put it into the app because there are various data rules and laws about collecting that kind of data. So what I do is I have a platform I use called Heads Up, and that allows people that have volunteered to be on a program, they can enter their data onto Heads Up. And if they have any kind of wearable, I wear an Oura ring. I just think I saw you wear one too.
I have Oura Ring, I have Whoop, I have Apple Watch, all of it.
The whole thing. So
I'm a lost soul.
So on the platform I have, it allows you to bring in almost any wearable data. So no matter what someone has, they can, as long as they've given permission, they can import their data onto that platform. So then I pair it with a very simple questionnaire called a MyMop. It's a measure yourself outcome where I mainly track symptoms rather than anything else. So, and so that allows for people like yourself who are not necessarily ill, but are looking to do something. So like your main goal might be that you want to run faster, you want to, whatever it is, we can track that along with the data from the wearables and see how many times you're using the device. But at the moment, I'm kind of going slow with that because it's quite labor intensive because I have to do it fairly manually. The platform's automated, but, you have to get consent and people have to manually log the use of the CeraThrive system.
Do you think that there would be a chance to integrate it into your app somehow so people could just plug in their variables through different third-party integrations that exist? So you would basically...
The Heads Up does allow you to do that. It's just I need to make it, you'd need to kind of make it something that you would have on a desktop because at the moment I can't put it in my app for various data reasons. But yeah, for sure. People do it, don't they? There are other companies where you're able to kind of track and even gamify the metrics. So that would obviously be a great next step. And also having a monitoring thing. I look at various monitoring things because monitoring what's going on with the brain, we can look at heart rate variability. It's a good sign of nervous system. But I would also like to have something like QEG or maybe functional near infrared that would look at brain blood flow.
Well, theoretically, you could implement a lot of sensors into those devices, right? Because you are already putting it on your body.
That's right. So that's where I'm going at the moment. I'm lucky that I've my business partners is the manufacturer, so I have some excellent engineers that are working on that right now to see how we can implement a couple of those things that I've mentioned. Maybe like the cortical blood flow would be a good one, and then we can provide that data simultaneously.
Well, one thing that I wanted to ask you about, what were some of the biggest obstacles on your journey to actually bring those products to life?
Some of the biggest obstacles are very mundane things, because actually, like I say, I'm very lucky with the engineers that I have. And a lot of the things that I threw at them that I thought would be bottlenecks weren't at all. I wanted to have it so that you could disable the Bluetooth, and I thought that was going to be a big thing, and that happened straight away. The design was fairly easy. But things like there was a chip shortage in China last year, and then that kind of threw.
I have heard that from many people, actually.
So, it's very mundane things that become bottlenecks that you don't think about, who would have thought that? And then for some reason, there was one little cable that became very hard to get. So, from the hardware point of view, the things that you think are going to be difficult turn out to be fairly straightforward. And then things that, you just take for granted that you're going to be able to get all the chips and everything to make it, that became a bit of a problem. So that did delay me for a while. So I was a little bit late on my first delivery of the batch, just for those very simple, just supply chain reasons.
How did you go about marketing the product and spreading the word to actually make sure that you get the initial batch of users?
Yeah, well, I already had done a lot of talking in the biohacking world, because I started off with the biohacking thing like 10 years ago, or whenever it started, the first Dave Asprey event in LA.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've been involved in alternative medicines and different kinds of devices and things for a long time. I mean, the photobiomodulation, probably 5 years, but even before then, I was looking at all kinds of consciousness interface devices and imprinted remedies, PMF. So I already had a bit of an audience in the biohacker world. So I was able actually to take a lot of pre-orders just based on my previous talks at events and podcasts. Podcasts are a great way to reach people. And I set up a podcast during lockdown, Rebel Scientist podcast. So I utilize all those channels, and I actually find, I am at a lot of the events too. I'm a bit of a conference nerd. You'll find me at almost all of these biohacking events. So that was definitely my first audience.
I would love to also hear from your perspective, what are some of the other interesting things happening in the biohacking and longevity space? What is top of mind outside of red light therapy, where you dedicate, I assume, majority of your time?
Yeah.
But there's a lot happening, and I would love to hear from someone who dedicates the life to it.
I think for me, well, the thing that I think is going to shake things up the most for sure is integrating AI into all of these different technologies. And I was at some conferences last year in LA where there was some very, very forward-thinking people who are looking at how we can utilize AI in diagnosis and in delivery of treatments, making very, very specific targeted deliveries of therapeutics and very, very sophisticated assessments of things. I think is definitely, we're at the very start of this very tailored approach to health and well-being that AI is going to bring us. And also I think AI is just going to advance science generally. I mean, I met some amazing guy who was looking at using AI to work out protein structure, things that we just can't, it's very difficult to do at the moment. And then all of a sudden you can start to bring these AI tools in and just make strides that, 10 years worth of strides you can make like in a single month. I mean, it's totally fascinating, the whole AI thing that's going on. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I feel like there are multiple forces that support that. One thing is definitely in the developments of artificial intelligence, but I also think that quantum computing is making a huge contribution, especially with those massive calculations that are very much needed to develop new drugs, to look into those protein structures, as you mentioned, because if these two forces go together, then I think we will be able to make a lot of breakthroughs for health very, very soon. And it's great to see that industry thriving right now.
It's really, really amazing. And I think, we maybe don't even appreciate the kind of developments that we'll have in the next few years. And then also I'm very interested in regenerative health. Like a lot of the kind of biohacking longevity conferences now, they have a main focus on regenerative health, like stem cell therapies, all different kinds of stem cell therapies. So again, that's very, very interesting what people are being able to do with that, and the potential then for life expansion.
What would you like to see in that area?
Well, I mean, I'm interested because I think some of these things go hand in hand. Like we know that red light, for example, can help proliferation and migration of stem cells. But if we could work out exactly how that's working, some of these conditions like Parkinson's disease, where we know that it's caused by a degeneration of a certain group of neurons in the brain, if we can start to work out how we can replace those cells using our own modified stem cells or another form of therapy, would just totally revolutionize and just make such a huge difference to the lives of millions of people. So I'm hugely excited about it. And when I go to these events, I can see people are making strides. I saw a fabulous talk by a guy called Dr. Ian White from Miami, and that he was using a therapy from amniotic fluid in order to replace people who'd had very bad, severe burns. And he had some slides, where he was showing that his particular way of treating people was just like 10 times faster than the normal route of people having to have skin grafts and things like that. So it's already, the research is starting to happen where people are making massive discoveries that can potentially really impact people's lives in a big way.
Do you have to battle some skepticism when it comes to building CeraThrive, or like people are adopting to it fairly quickly?
People in the biohacking, longevity, regenerative medicine space are in.
These people, they try everything.
They're in, they understand it. But, anybody else, here, I mean, I'm here in England right now. It's a very skeptical nation. If I said to my doctor, I can help neurodegeneration by shining light on the head, I still am met by pitying looks, because people, they very much put that in the woo-woo category. Although the science is there. So definitely, what I've done is not the kind of thing you want to do if you really want to have a good scientific reputation, because it just is, it's just a constant battle. And I think it's going to be for a while, even though research is coming out, but it's a constant battle for everyone in the space to kind of prove the validity of the science, because there's really not that much research money goes in. And really, we are very set, in the way that we have of doing things. And that's for not just, there's a lot of political and economic reasons why that happens too.
I think that there's so much happening in this space that it simply cannot be made up. I had one of the co-founders of Kinian on the podcast, and what they do is basically helping with joint pain through red light and laser therapy. A bit of a, I would say, different application of some of the very similar concepts of what you are after. And there is many more players in the space. And I think that you must also feel that there is some at least healthy level of competition, maybe in some cases even too much.
No, I think it's, it's going to raise us all up. So I embrace all the competitors, and I love it when I go to these events. We're a small group of people who are doing brain red light therapy at the moment. So every time there's these gatherings, all the companies come together, and I'm pleased to say I'm friends with a lot of them, and we share our data. I know the Kinian guys. I think it's great. I think that there's enough room in this industry that we don't need to be competitive. And in fact, until we get like a proper registered board, and we get some, we get a lot bigger and we have more of an impact, that we need to have a lot more cooperation in the industry to get the message out, to kind of do lobbying, to get people to understand that this is actually a real scientifically validated therapy that people could really do as a first line, rather than something that people tend to come to when they've tried everything else. So no, I love the competition. I like to see what everybody else is doing, and it just it just raises us all up.
So what do you think needs to be the outcome of the research so the broader general adoption increases? What are we missing to fight the skeptics?
Yeah, well, at the moment, there is a lot of research that's going on. It's just not so widely published. But I think we need for people to want to do the research, because at the moment, because there's not, it's not so widely known, people are not taking up the research in the first place. Actually, I got turned down to do a lecture at Imperial College in London on neuroscience because they said that they only wanted to sponsor evidence-based research. And I wrote them a bit of a snotty letter saying, unless your students know about this, we won't be able to get the research to provide the evidence, because that's where it starts. We need to have students that are interested enough that they want to do the research so that we get the evidence that we need to make it evidence-based. So we have a little bit of a block there where people are a bit blind to that. And there are some people who are really kind of leading the crusade. We've got Dr. Paolo Casano, who's in Harvard. There are people who are trying to do it. It's just we need people to maybe understand the science a bit more, so that then people take on the research. And at the moment, we still do have a block with the regulatory bodies like the FDA, because we don't have, there are not really enough people within that organization who are willing to look at the studies that are being published.
You are basically putting your name on the line to power through this, and hopefully on the flip side, you will come out of this as a big winner.
Yeah, hopefully. But, doesn't matter to me too much. Even in the small amount of units that I've sold, I've already had such brilliant case studies that I know that I've helped a significant amount of people already. So from my point of view, I've got some fabulous case studies. I have a guy with motor neuron who's getting amazing results. I have a little cohort of people now. I have a lady with IBS who's able to go outside for the first time in ages because she's had such bad symptoms. So from my point of view, my job is, I can tick right there. That's really what's my motivation. So even if, the FDA or we never get the classification, I'm quite happy to kind of do as much as I can in a small way to get the therapy out.
I feel like having those case studies and having those success stories definitely helps to stay on the track and continue the journey despite all the obstacles.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very grateful for all the people who give me the positive feedback, because then you're right, that's the motivation to keep on with it. And like I say, we are a small group at the moment, and so there's a lot of support within the red light therapy groups. There's a lot of things that are set up. We go to different conferences and support each other because we all believe it's an important therapy. So yes, I have the support.
And you have mentioned that you have been in the biohacking space for over a decade now.
Mm-hmm.
I would just like to see a little bit more inside your life. What are some of the other techniques and practices that you have adopted yourself that are helping you to go about life?
Since I kind of got into this more kind of primal way of thinking, a lot of the stuff that I do is not such high-tech biohacking. I do very simple things like I try and make sure that I see the morning sunlight and at least touch ground with my hands or my feet every day. I walk every day. I do my, if I have to have a day of meetings, I can take them outside and I'm walking. Even here in England, where it's pretty grotty right now, I walk. I do at least an hour and a half, or mostly 2 hours every day, rain or shine. And I go to bed early. I mean, that's a boring one, but I do try and do all of these different things. And then because I have a lot of biohacker friends now, whenever I go to Miami or wherever it is, I do the cold tubs. I find it hard to do in England, though, I must admit. I think all these biohackers are kind of in these lovely places like Austin and Miami, and they're doing all their cold tubs every day. It's a harder one to do when it's not sunny outside. But here in England, every now and then I do sea swimming to get my cold exposure.
That's my favorite thing to do over the Christmas holidays. We have a tradition in my hometown that we all go to swim in the river, and sometimes it's partially frozen, sometimes it's quite warm, so it's always a surprise what the temperature is going to be.
Yeah, and it's amazing how something simple like that can have an effect on your. It's not only your kind of health, but it makes you feel like that you've done something in the day. It's kind of an obstacle to be overcome. It's something where you feel like that's a challenge and I did it. Like getting in the sea in England is a challenge. So if you can do that, some of these other challenges in life, I think it kind of prepares you to meet all kinds of challenges if you just do something simple like getting in a cold body of water.
Oh, 100%. And especially if you do something difficult early in the day, I think it really sets you up for whatever is going to be the challenge of the day that you will need to get through. And I think it just helps you to build the resilience that you need to deal with the circumstances of the day.
Yeah, it kind of sets you up that if you're going to make yourself, it's not even make yourself, but if you kind of put yourself through something difficult and you come out the other side and it's fine, that you can face anything. It kind of gives you that kind of power. You think, yeah, okay, I can do it, because you've made yourself do. I mean, because like some of these things, like let's say the cold tubs, you have to kind of psych yourself up for it. But once you've done it, it's an achievement. Or even long, really long walks, or just doing sprints, any of these things, our kind of biology is set up for ease. That's our default, because from a primal point of view, we would take rests and opportunities whenever we could because we had active lives. Now it's kind of going against our biology because we default to laying on the telly and watching Netflix. It's much easier than some of these things. So I think it's very good to push the body, no matter how you do it, whether it's running or cold or sauna, whatever it is.
Looking at the future, what would you like to see from CeraThrive going forward? Where do you want to take it?
Oh, well, ultimately, I would like these therapies to be recognized as a first line of treatment for some of these conditions. So that's kind of always on my mind. And I try to do things where I'm putting my focus on the research. So ultimately, perhaps we could get these medical approvals that would allow these devices to meet a mass market. So that's my kind of 5-year goal, is to get medical approval for the Cera system.
Well, Sarah, I would love for that to happen. I will be keeping my fingers crossed. And I wanted to thank you so much for a very insightful conversation. I know at least a little bit more about what structured water is now and how grounding is important. And of course, red light therapy has been part of my, I would say, random routine. I would say every few weeks or so, but now I'll be paying even more attention to it. And thank you so much for a great discussion.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.